GOPAC, the political organization the speaker used to head. And now, from Columbia, the capital of South Carolina, a Republican presidential candidates debate with Lamar Alexander, Pat Buchanan, Steve Forbes, and Senator Bob Dole. David Stanton of local TV station WIS moderates the hour-long debate.
Welcome to Columbia, South Carolina, and the Republican Candidates for President debate. This event is sponsored by the South Carolina Business and Industry Political Education Committee. Joining us from are the top four Republican finishers in the New Hampshire primary. They are Steve Forbes, Senator Bob Dole, Pat Buchanan, and Governor Lamar Alexander. And gentlemen, thanks to all of you for being with us today.
Thank you.
The order of the questioning has been determined by a drawing earlier today, and let's begin. The first question: you have all at one time or another run negative campaign ads, and you have all complained about being the target of negative ads. There is evidence the mudslinging has kept people from participating in the political process. Do you think negative ads are hurting the political process, and do you regret having run such ads? Mr. Forbes.
I regret having spent so much time discussing my opponents when they made promises before an election and then routinely broke those promises after the election. However, in the last 2 weeks, I've concentrated simply on getting my message of growth, hope, and opportunity across to the American people, particularly in Delaware and in Arizona. I'm doing the same thing here in South Carolina and hope to do so for the remainder of the election. My campaign is based on the premise that America needs more freedom and less government. And I will not talk about my opponents if I can avoid it for the rest of this campaign. But I do believe that if they attack, I will respond. Thank you.
Senator Dole.
Well, I think Steve's been very effective with these negative ads. I saw my favorable ratings go from 80% in Iowa down to 50%. And he spent about $12 million, I think, just on Bob Dole. He's the king of negative advertising. He gets a title without any contest. I mean, it's great. He can claim that title. But I think we ought to keep our eye on the ball. Our target is Bill Clinton. It's none of us up here. It's Bill Clinton. He's vetoed bill after bill after bill. So we have nothing but positive ads on South Carolina television now. We have two very fine positive ads. We're going to keep it positive. I'm positive about America. I want to see America grow. We're going into the next century with a new president. The president's going to be Bob Dole, and I welcome you all to this debate.
Mr. Buchanan.
Well, I believe that I think, Steve, you're right. You overdid it with those negative ads. And I think, Bob, you overdid it up in New Hampshire. And I think there was reaction against both of you on that. But I do believe there's something right about comparative ads. And the idea that pointing out that Senator Dole, as Steve Forbes did, has voted for tax increases repeatedly, there's nothing wrong with that as long as the ads are rooted in truth. But our campaign is a positive campaign. It's about representing the American people who have been left out and are unrepresented here in South Carolina and around the country. It is about providing a voice for the voiceless. And we've run a positive campaign. That's why we've done so well without the resources of my two friends on the right.
Governor Alexander.
Figuratively speaking.
Well, I'm
You're right.
well, maybe. I'm glad to get the negative ads brought up, and then maybe we can get them out of the way.
You're running one right
I mean,
now.
if Steve is the king, Senator Dole is the prince, and your ads are on in South Carolina.
Right
now,
me.
Bob, let me
Senator
speak
Dole,
during my
Governor.
time.
I'll yield
Senator Dole in New Hampshire, for his last 4 days, took all of his ads off and ran negative ads against me, just me. CNN said they were untruthful, they were misleading, and they were distorted. Those ads are on in South Carolina today. They're on in Georgia. They were on in Arizona. You're also making telephone calls that are negative, as was done before, and you're passing out material. Now, that's going on, Bob. That needs to stop. We need to be positive. I think you hurt me in New Hampshire, and I think you hurt yourself. And I think
Governor,
in the rest
time
of the
up.
campaign,
Time
we
up,
ought to
Governor.
talk about
Your
the
time
future.
is up.
Thank you, sir. We're now going to take a question from our audience. This comes from Brian Carmody. He is from Charleston, South Carolina. Brian?
Gentlemen, what would the impact of a flat tax be on real estate values?
Senator Dole.
Well, my view is there are 28 million homes out there where people deduct their mortgage interest deduction. I think that deduction ought to be saved. We also ought to, people may want to make charitable contributions, maybe to the Red Cross, just pick that out of the blue there. And you ought to be able to deduct that. And also, one thing will not happen in a Dole administration. We're not going to shift the tax burden from the rich to middle-class Americans. I think a single concept makes a lot of sense. Jack Kemp headed up a commission for me and Speaker Gingrich, and we're now in the process of having hearings. We want a simpler system, a flatter system, a fairer system, and we're going to have that in a Dole administration. We can eliminate much of the IRS, we can save a lot of money, and we can make it easier for taxpayers to comply with the law and be better off in the end.
Mr. Buchanan.
Well, I have a flat tax, and we proposed it a few months before Steve got in. And I think a flat tax is fundamentally a good idea. But mine preserves the mortgage interest deduction for the middle class, so it will have a positive effect on home ownership, which I think is a good conservative value. We also have deductions for contributions to churches, Pentecostal, Baptist, Catholic, Evangelical, anyone you name. And I believe, however, that Steve's got a good basic idea in the flat tax if he simply would tax the rich at the same rate as everyone else, because a flat tax will enable us to downsize the most obtrusive, outrageous institution, American government, and that's the Internal Revenue Service. And so we're going to have a flat tax weighted toward the middle class and weighted against the IRS.
Governor Alexander.
Well, the answer to the question is it would reduce the value of homes by perhaps 15%, depending upon the state in which you live, if we have a Forbes flat tax, which eliminates the mortgage interest deduction and the local property tax. I think all of us agree we need a lower tax rates, we need less tax on income, on capital gains, and we need a simpler code. I think Jack Kemp did us a service with his principles. And I think if we stick to those principles and recognize there are some sound policies like the mortgage interest deduction, like the charitable deduction, like Jack Kemp's suggestion about deducting perhaps the FICA tax, we can have a flatter, simpler tax code, and that would be the first objective of the new Republican president.
Mr. Forbes.
Unless you get a real flat tax, the IRS is not going to go away. With my flat tax, the IRS becomes RIP, rest in peace. That should be our goal. And to answer your question on real estate values, it'll help commercial real estate values by allowing structures to be written off in year one instead of depreciated over 30 years. Also on home ownership, it's going to help home ownership. Even critics of the flat tax concede that the flat tax will lower interest rates. If you have a 7.5%, 8% mortgage today, with a flat tax, you'll be able to refinance it at 5.5% or 6%. The flat tax also allows you to keep more of what you earn. A typical South Carolina family will save up to $1,000 a year. So your interest goes down, you have more take-home pay. That's going to help home ownership, as it always has done before.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen, now we're going to take some short answer questions. You'll have a sentence or two to answer each of these questions. Mr. Buchanan, we begin with you. If you were president, would you send military forces against Cuba in retaliation for the downing of 2 private U.S. planes?
I would have American airplanes patrolling the Florida Straits, and I would shoot down any Cuban aircraft which tried to shoot at a civilian plane in the Florida Straits. I would not recommend an invasion of Cuba.
Governor?
The answer is no. There should be a blockade, and the president should have passed the Helms-Burton bill earlier and quit flirting around with Castro. We're reaping what he sowed.
Mr. Forbes?
We should have tightened the embargo a long time ago. If they try to shoot down civilian planes again, they should be put on notice that we're going to shoot them down. We should put them on notice right now. If they go up, they get shot down.
Senator Dole.
Keep in mind, 4 American citizens died. These are Americans who were shot down. The Dole-Helms-Burton bill will pass the Congress sometime next week. This will permit us to tighten sanctions on Castro, which we should have been doing. This administration has had a failed policy for 3 years. Its lack of leadership, its lack of experience.
Time up, Senator. Thank you, sir. Next question. What cabinet offices, if any, would you seek to abolish, Governor?
Well, education, which I tried to abolish in 1981 when I was governor, and I asked President Reagan to do it, energy and commerce. But the more important thing is not to abolish the department, it's to move the function out of Washington back home.
Okay. Mr. Forbes?
Governor Alexander, when he headed up the education department, increased it by several $billion, so much for downsizing. I would get rid of the education department, energy, commerce, housing and urban development, an alphabet agency starting with the FCC. There's a lot that can be cut. Those will just be a start.
Senator?
I didn't vote for the education department. I didn't serve as secretary, but I'd be happy to get rid of it and send the money back to South Carolina, back to my state of Kansas. The same is true of HUD, energy, and most of commerce. Some of commerce I think you need to save and put off somewhere else.
Mr. Buchanan.
Bob, why haven't you done it since you got the power of the purse? I will do
Well, we
it.
don't
Let me
have the
tell you,
votes.
the question is, should be reframed, what departments will you keep, Mr. Buchanan? I will keep state and justice and treasury and one or two more, and that will be about it.
Gentlemen, we've been
about
talking
defense,
about the
Pat?
negative ads, and we
Yeah,
are now...
that'll, War Department, Defense Department, we keep, Steve.
Okay, now let's move on to the next portion of the program. We're going to take a look at some of the negative ads throughout the next 45 minutes or so. The first one is an ad that has been run by the Dole campaign.
It's probably very good.
President Pat Buchanan. He says women are simply not endowed by nature with the measure of single-minded ambition and the will to succeed. And he advocates arming South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan with nuclear weapons. He's too extreme, and he can't beat Bill Clinton.
Mr. Buchanan, what's your reaction to
How long do we
that?
have on that?
45 seconds.
All right.
You said that. You
Senator
said that.
Dole, we raised this issue up in New Hampshire. Senator Dole's using the same word against me that Bill Clinton and Al Gore used against Senator Dole and Republicans, extremist, extremist. It's the same name they called Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. They're calling Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan does not recommend, has never recommended, handing out American nuclear weapons like lifesavers to Taiwan, South Korea, or Japan. I wrote a column indicating that it's very possible these countries, under threat of Beijing and Pyongyang, might develop nuclear weapons on their own. And Bob, it is a sign of the vapidity and the hollowness of your campaign that in your 72nd year as majority leader, that you're running these
11th
kinds
year,
of ads.
11th year.
35th year in Congress, that you're running
You've been at
ads of these
Washington
kinds
35
about,
years, so.
about an old friend that you know are not true and that you
Time up.
withdrew in New Hampshire
Time up,
yourself.
Mr. Buchanan. Senator Dole, do you stand by that ad?
Well, I just took it out of his columns, and maybe they're not accurate. I always thought they were. But, you know, if they're not accurate, that's all right with me. But Pat and I are friends. That doesn't mean I can't. He said it. I didn't say it. I don't go around making these things up. I'm a busy man. I've got things to do trying to save America. So, from the isolationist policies that Pat Buchanan wants, you know, he was against the Gulf War. President Bush's finest hour, he was against. He wrote 20 columns against the Gulf War.
He was against
World
Bosnia,
War II,
too.
World War I. I served. I'm the one up here who served in the military, and I appreciate the patriotism in this state and the many people who've given their lives. And we're going to have a strong defense when Bob Dole's President of the United States.
Governor Alexander, what is your reaction to that ad?
I think Bob Dole is wrong to call Pat Buchanan a name, which is extreme.
I didn't call him an
you said he
extremist.
was extreme.
No, I said the
Your
views
co-
are too extreme. You got to listen carefully. You've
I
been
watched
Secretary
it
of
carefully.
Education. Yeah.
You should contest him on the issues, which is what I do.
Well, we ought to contest Bill Clinton on the issue.
Well, then why didn't you make an ad about Bill Clinton instead of Pat Buchanan? Senator Dole, you're one of our finest public servants.
You
why
keep
don't
saying
you say
that,
where
but then
do
you always have a little
why do
hooker
you-
in the end there. You know, that's-
Senator Dole, you're one of our finest public servants. Why don't you tell us where you want to take the country instead of calling Pat Buchanan names and distorting my record? While I was keeping taxes low, you raised taxes. Why don't you say that if you want to talk about records?
Amen to Alexander.
sound like,
Mr. Forbes, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Steve, you got to defend me. Somebody has to.
Well, Senator, since you've been on the public payroll for 35 years, if you can't defend yourself
never
now,
been
I
on any
can't help you. And concerning the ad itself, I think it looks like it may have been taken out of context. I don't know. I've written a number of columns myself. I've seen what your people have done and some of the other candidates have done, taking what I've said out of context and distorting it all sorts of ways like a pretzel. So I don't know the particulars of that Pat Buchanan column, but I can't imagine that he would advocate giving nuclear arms to places like Taiwan or South Korea. As for calling him an extremist, I think we should
didn't
stay
use the word
away.
extremist.
Well, only a lawyer would think that you would come away from that ad
No.
without calling him an
Only a
extremist.
newspaper, only a magazine published.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forbes.
Yeah.
We're now going to take a question from a reporter here in South Carolina. Lee Bandy is with the state newspaper. Lee?
Much has been said about whether a litmus test should be applied in the selection of a running mate. And what I would like to ask you is this: would you eliminate from consideration a candidate who is pro-choice?
Mr. Forbes?
I believe that a running mate should share my vision of where America can go, that our best days are ahead if we make certain changes and get certain obstacles out of the way that stand in the way of the American people moving ahead. If they don't share that vision and mission, I don't want them on the ticket. As for the abortion issue, I want somebody who agrees with me that we should protect life from conception to natural death, who also realizes that to get abortions disappeared in America, to get them to vanish in America, we must have a change of heart, change of attitude, change of opinion. I think we can bring about that, starting with the consensus on banning abortions in late pregnancy, and start to persuade people so that we can move forward. If they don't believe in that, then I don't want them on my ticket.
Senator Dole.
My main goal is to bring America together. You know, we have issues that divide us. I've said from day one, we're one America. We're not young, we're not old, we're not black, we're not white, we're not pro-choice, we're not pro-life. But I would select someone who pretty much fit my views. I want a conservative running mate, somebody who's prepared to take over on day one if necessary, somebody who's had the experience, somebody who understands Bob Dole, somebody I can work with. The 3.6 million people in South Carolina want me to pick the best possible candidate, and I'll do that. I'll pick someone who understands Congress, who understands America, who knows what it is to work for a living, who didn't inherit his wealth or her wealth, and who understands what made America great in the first place.
There you go again, Bob.
And what sacrifice is all about.
Mr. Buchanan.
Well, I have said I would rule out for Vice President General Colin Powell, who's a respected military figure, because he is not pro-life. My vice presidential running mate will be pro-life, period, because I believe that the unborn child is made in the image and likeness of God, and that there is never a justification for its deliberate destruction. Beyond that, I believe the 34 million abortions we've had in this country is the greatest atrocity and travesty and horror in our country's history. I am dedicated to doing what I can to bring that to an end through constitutional means. And so my vice president, my running mate, is going to be pro-life, as I am, and he's going to be a conservative and a traditionalist. He doesn't have to agree with me 100%. Shelley doesn't agree with me 100%. But my vice president will be pro-life.
Governor Alexander.
Lee, the answer to your question is no. My view of a vice president is someone I like because you have to spend a lot of time with them, someone who could be president because so many have had to be, and someone whose views are a lot like mine so people can tell where we're coming from. I think this ticket balancing business is for the birds. I'd like for people to know where I'm coming from and where I'm going. My view on abortion is that I'm pro-life. I believe states have the right to restrict abortion and should. I believe the federal government should stay entirely out of abortion, ought neither to encourage it, nor subsidize it, nor prohibit it. And I would use my voice as president, more than any president, to try to persuade our country through state restrictions and individual decisions to reduce the number of abortions.
Gentlemen, we're going to take another look at another ad that has been run in this campaign. This is an ad run by the Alexander campaign.
Bob Dole voted to raise taxes by $320 billion. Alexander supports term limits. Dole opposes term limits. Alexander has fresh, conservative ideas. After 35 years in Washington, Bob Dole is out of ideas.
Senator Dole?
Well, I knew he was running negative ads. I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to embarrass him here in front of all these people. But here's a guy who wanted to be the Boy Scout up in New Hampshire and said none of us should run these kind of ads. Then he comes right down here and picks one out, which is not true. I support term limits. I've said I support term limits. In fact, there's an AdWatch analysis of that ad today that shows that it's completely wrong. I voted against tax increases 60 times. I fought the biggest tax increase in the history of the world, not just America. The Clinton tax increase, $265 billion. I got through Congress the biggest tax decrease in history when Pat Buchanan was at the White House in 1981 with Ronald Reagan. Bob Dole has made a difference. I want the country to grow. I want tax cuts for families with children. I want to reduce the capital gains rate. I want to get the economy going. I want more jobs and more opportunities for people.
Thank you, sir.
But that's too bad, Lamar. I wish you hadn't run that.
Governor Alexander, you stand by your ad?
I absolutely stand by the ad. Bob, the only reason that's on the air is because in 6 states, including the last 5 days in New Hampshire, you ran ads about my record that weren't true. You said I had an income tax in Tennessee when I rejected an income tax.
No, you asked for it in the state of the
No,
state
I
of the
said
state.
I
took it
rejected
right
an
out of
income tax, Bob, so I thought it was important to point out that we had reduced the debt fewer employees, and the 5th lowest taxes of any state. And while you were saying that, I thought a comparison ad was useful to point out the $320 billion in taxes that you raised between 1982 and 1990, and here is a list of them. And you said on Meet the Press in 1991 that the Congress doesn't need term limits, and we don't want it. And you haven't signed the term limits pledge.
Time up, Governor.
The only reason I have that
time
is
is up.
because you ran your negative ad spending millions of dollars on
Thank you,
them, and
sir.
I thought it was fair to do that.
Mr. Forbes.
Well, the ad is misleading in the sense that Senator Dole has voted for 16 tax increases, totaling almost $1 trillion. Now, yes, he's voted for some tax
lot of
cuts,
loophole
but it's
closers, some of your big
loophole
corporations. Yeah,
closers,
some of your big
raising
corporations.
taxes on Social Security, some loophole closing, raising taxes on incomes of working Americans, some
no, we didn't
loophole
do that.
closing.
We didn't do that.
You voted for tax increases across the board.
Not rate increases.
Now, Senator,
Don't malign my integrity here.
well, it's a typical Washington game.
Oh, yeah.
Where you say you're against taxes, yet you sometimes vote for tax cuts. When no one's looking, you vote for tax increases. Same thing on term limits. It might be nice to know where you stand. Is it 3 terms for the House and 2 terms for the Senate? That's what the people want to know.
Time.
You didn't sign that pledge. You're fudging again, just like Washington always
Mr.
does.
Buchanan, you get the last word on that ad.
All right, I don't know where Senator Dole stands on term limits. I've stood a long time for 3 years in the House and 2 terms in the
3
Senate.
terms in the House.
3 terms, excuse me, right. Now I've got to pick up on the other part that I think might be correct, Bob. You voted for the biggest tax increase in the Reagan years, 1982 and 1983.
That was sent up by Ronald Reagan.
And Ronald
Yes.
Reagan told me in the White House it's the worst mistake he ever made. And George Bush in 1990 raised taxes. And I was so opposed to that in my own party, that breaking a pledge, that I gave up my career and my job, and I challenged the President of the United States in my own party in New Hampshire. That is how opposed I am to big government. Now, Bob, you voted for that 1982 tax increase. You're right. And Reagan said it was the worst
cut
mistake.
rates, too,
All right.
in
You
92.
also voted in 1990 for that gigantic tax increase that I opposed. Do you think you made a mistake
Time
in
up,
those
Mr.
2
Buchanan.
votes for the largest tax increases in history up to that time?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to take a break
Time is
now,
up.
give you all a chance to catch your breath, and we'll have more of our debate in just a moment. Stay with us. Have 90 seconds here. 90 seconds.
How long?
About a third of the way in.
My goodness, this is a fast debate.
We're about a third of the way in. And we have a 90-second break, and then we'll have
We got a
another
90-second
20
break?
minutes, and then another break, and then we'll have 20 more minutes.
I love these things. That was a good debate we had here, huh? Well, we got rolling, huh?
How's your dog doing?
It was a good cross.
Leader's doing fine, except I haven't seen him.
Back and forth. We're just
I'm like Phil Graham.
Graham.
My dog doesn't even know me anymore.
I hope you'll notice.
We have a nice neighbor lady, 2 doors down, who just loves dogs.
Test you on ideas.
I think what they're doing to me is
And
they're
the guilt
really
by
making it
associate, the guilt by
almost
associate will.
unbelievable. You ever seen what they did last night?
After you gave me that picture, I thought I should send you one of our dogs.
Yeah, I like one. I think I traded
The guy
pictures.
works for Howard Stern. Just unbelievable.
Robert Byrd's dog, Billy.
Oh, it's
That was a dog named Billy. Late at night, we get into debates.
We're down to
My son
liberals,
was Billy.
exactly. So we only get 20 minutes, that is?
Well, then we'll go for 20 more minutes now, and then we'll take another break and go for 20 more. It's an hour debate.
Goodness, I thought it was much longer than that had been used up. That's outstanding.
Yeah.
You get a chance to answer the question,
Right.
Bob.
Right. Great.
How about you yield me some of your time?
2 seconds.
All right, here's a... Whose turn?
You. And welcome back to Columbia, South Carolina. We have the 4 leading candidates in the race for the Republican nomination for President of the United States. And we're going to take another question from our audience. Sandra Myrick from Columbia. Sandra?
If I am brutally raped by a vicious criminal and become pregnant, would you oppose a first trimester abortion knowing that a continued pregnancy would cause me tremendous mental and emotional anguish?
Senator Dole.
Yes, I would. I'm opposed to abortion, as I've indicated before. I have a strong pro-life record, a consistent record in the Congress of the United States, and I would keep it that way.
Mr. Buchanan?
Just a brief answer.
No, sir, 45 seconds.
Oh, 45 seconds? Okay. Let me say this. If that happened to you, it would be a horrendous atrocity, and it's happening to too many women across this country. And what I believe should happen to the rapist in a case like that, if it's particularly vicious and you've got a serial rapist, I would vote for his execution. I saw a man executed in the Missouri State Penitentiary who raped and brutalized a little 8-year-old girl, and that's what I believe ought to happen. As for you, I would try to counsel you to go to my friend, the Piedmont Women's Center, run by a friend of mine, who counsels those who've been raped and begs and urges them and pleads with them and provides support for them if they will only carry the child to term and we can put it up for adoption. I would try to counsel you to do that because I believe your unborn child is innocent, and the only guilty party here is the rapist.
Governor Alexander.
Thank you for the question. I'm pro-life, and I believe states ought to pass the laws that make a decision about what the government should do in a case like that. But if I were the governor and I were making a decision, I would say in that instance, I would create an exception to the law against abortion, and the decision in that case of rape would be yours.
Mr. Forbes, 45 seconds.
I believe in the cases of rape, incest, or where the life of the mother is genuinely at stake, then there is a right to an abortion.
And now we're going to take another look at some of the ads that have been running. This is an ad being run by the Buchanan campaign.
Dole, Alexander, and Forbes supported a new trade deal with Mexico. They promised it would create jobs. It didn't. Said it would improve our trade balance. It hasn't. They claimed American wages would grow. They haven't.
I will rewrite these unfair trade deals that destroy our jobs.
And gentlemen, Mr. Forbes, would you respond to that, please?
The problem with NAFTA is not the desire to reduce trade barriers. When trade barriers are reduced, America does genuinely well. We're the most competitive nation in the world. If we reduce barriers here at home on Americans getting ahead, we will continue to be by far the most competitive nation in the world. The problem with NAFTA was that neither the Clinton administration nor the Mexican government had lived up to the spirit of NAFTA or the letter of NAFTA. They put in, for example, a massive devaluation of the peso for the express purpose of making it harder for American products to get into Mexico and easier for Mexican products to get into the United States. That is wrong. That's why I oppose the Mexican bailout. I think Mexico should stabilize the peso, and both governments should live up to the agreement.
Mr. Buchanan, you stand by your ad?
Oh, I certainly do. The problem with NAFTA, Steve, it was a lousy deal to begin with, and we knew it. Your $1 billion trade surplus is gone. We got a $15 billion trade deficit with Mexico. 300,000 lost American jobs, many of them in South Carolina. Every member of the Republican delegation from South Carolina to Congress opposed NAFTA wisely. It was great for them to do so. Illegal immigration is up, narcotics are coming in, and Senator Dole and his friend Bill Clinton put together a $50 billion bailout of that corrupt government in Mexico. 300,000 lost jobs, $50 billion bailout in 2 years. If NAFTA is a success, I would hate to see a failure. And let me suggest folks take a look at this morning's paper. $111 billion trade deficit America ran. $175 billion of that is in products. Metastasizing cancer is eating out our heart, friends.
Thank you, sir. Senator Dole.
But I only thought we had 10 seconds on the last end, and let me suggest that I support the exception for rape, incest, life of the mother. And I would do pretty much as as Pat Buchanan indicates in this case. So I want to make that clear. I thought we had just a short answer, but I wanted to underscore my strong pro-life record for people who have that view. And again, I think we can have different views and still be good Republicans. Let me say, as far as the ad is concerned, NAFTA, it's not NAFTA. It's the lack of this administration. It's President Clinton. If he would enforce our trade agreements, we wouldn't have the problems. We wouldn't lose textile jobs in South Carolina. Every $1 billion in trade creates between 16 and 20,000 jobs. And South Carolina's increased their exports to Mexico by 65%. We need to trade. We can't build a wall around America. What we need is somebody in the White House who understands that and will enforce the trade laws. We wouldn't have these problems.
Thank you, sir.
You wouldn't have these ads
Would you
either.
vote for NAFTA again today?
Not without some changes in it, but
Good.
you didn't mention the peso You know, that's what's happened. We had the peso collapse. We've got a
But
recession
we
there.
predicted, Ross and I said it would happen. We said it was overvalued.
Gentlemen,
But
let's give
what's going to
Governor,
happen to all these people coming across the border?
We're gonna
let's give
stop
Governor
and go.
Alexander a chance to respond to this ad, okay? Thank you.
Pat reminds me of the time that I went as governor down to Memphis to try to persuade the International Harvester plant not to close, and I got in the newspaper, and everybody thought I was doing a great job, and so I went back again the next week, and I got in the newspaper, and everybody thought I was doing a great job, and they closed anyway. And I figured if all I did as governor for 8 years was stand in front of closing plants, that I wouldn't help much. So what I did was try to create an environment for joining the world and recruiting Saturn and Nissan. I went out here to BMW this morning, and Pat, if we put your trade tariffs on, they're trying to sell to 100 companies. You'll cost South Carolina jobs. You're good at what the problem is, but you haven't got one single solution for creating a new job. That's why it would be helpful. You should run for governor of Washington or wherever you live, and then you'd have that kind of experience.
Lamar,
well, you live there. You should run for governor, as I did, and then you have to create jobs.
Time up, Governor. Time up.
Replace the jobs that you lose.
Governor, I don't believe in tariffs on Germany. That is free and fair trade. The Japanese do not practice free and fair trade.
Well,
if you believe that, Lamar,
we're ready.
I don't know what you smoke down there in Tennessee.
Well, we're ready to sell Saturns. We're ready to sell Saturns made in Tennessee
Good,
and BMWs made in
Thank
South
you.
Carolina
Time's
in
up.
Japan.
Thank you very
and
much,
you would
Governor.
cost us those jobs. Pat.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Buchanan, this is another rapid-fire question. You'll
Sure.
have 1 or 2 sentences. Would your Justice Department, if you were president, pursue an effort to get women into the Citadel, the Charleston Military College?
Ooh, that's a high fat one right over the plate. First week in office, I'm going to tell the Justice Department, reverse your position, support VMI and the Citadel to maintain the integrity of the Cadet Corps. And you guys are lawyers, you can figure out how to do it.
Governor Alexander.
I have, as education secretary, I thought that boys' schools in Detroit and men's colleges are fine and strong, and there's no reason for the U.S. Department of Education or the Department of Justice to say that that somehow violates the Constitution. We can have other opportunities for women, but sometimes we need these opportunities for men, and in the case of Detroit, boys.
Mr. Forbes.
In this diverse country of ours, it's legitimate to have various educational institutions, higher education institutions. And if they want some to be single-sex, that's fine. If they want to be co-ed, that's fine. There ought to be that choice. So I would not go after VMI, would not go after Citadel. We can have diversity in America.
Senator Dole.
Well, I made my position very clear when I was honored to speak at commencement at Citadel in 1994, and I still feel that way. We can have separate institutions. They also have an alternate plan for the young women who wanted to enter Citadel. So they had an alternate plan, ROTC training, precisely what they wanted, and I think that's the way it ought to be left. Keep it that way.
Next question, gentlemen. All of you are in favor of the free markets and less government interference in people's economic lives.
That is.
But look at it from a worker's perspective. Global economies, mega mergers, and sometimes mega layoffs. In fact, our recent poll in South Carolina showed the economy and jobs is the #1 issue concerning voters here. What is the role, if any, of the federal government in protecting the worker? Governor Alexander.
Well, that goes... We have 100 million people in this country who work in the private sector, and 8 million lose their jobs every year. That's why I got busy in the 80s, putting my focus on the job spigot instead of the job drain. Pat wants to build a wall around the country. That's no solution. Here's what to do. Job growth means lower taxes, less regulations. I would be the science and technology president, and then we would go to work making it easier for someone who loses a job or changes a job to go to the next one. Work scholarships instead of bureaucratic training programs. The college grant and loan program is very important. You hear at commencements, way to go mom, as mom goes back to school to get a job. And our new tax system should make it easier for pensions and health care to follow you from one job to the next. That's the truth about the kind of world we're going into, and that's a solution,
Time up, Governor.
not just a list of problems.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Forbes.
I think South Carolina is a showcase of how to create jobs. You've created more jobs in recent years than most states. You've done so by attracting jobs around the world, whether it's from companies like Herc Celanese or BMW and other companies like Hitachi. That's the way to go. Create jobs. The government bureaucrats can't run the government. They can't create jobs. All they'll do is destroy jobs, just as they've done in Europe. The way to create jobs in America is the way we've always done it. That is, reduce the tax burden, especially on small businesses, reduce the regulatory burden, make the dollar stable again so we get low interest rates, low cost of capital, do those things and other measures, and America is going to roar like a rocket. The potential is there. The potential is there. All we have to do is remove the restraints, and we'll move ahead and create those jobs.
Senator Dole.
Well, in 1994, South Carolina exported $6 billion worth of goods. Right now, the average GDP in South Carolina is about 3.2%, and based on March growth estimates, you're going to create about 16,000 jobs through 1995. What we need to do is balance the budget. We need a president who will sign a balanced budget. We sent him the first one in a generation. We need a president who will reduce the capital gains rate. He vetoed that in the bill we sent to him. We need a balanced budget. We need a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget. We need to reduce the capital gains rate. We need to create more opportunities for people out there, people wanting to work. Most people want to work, and South Carolina is leading the way. You're not going to do it, as I say, by building a wall around America and playing on the fears of people. We've got to reach out for the hopes and aspirations of people. This is America.
Time up,
We're
Senator.
one America.
Thank you,
We're going to
Senator.
make it work.
Mr. Buchanan.
Let me talk to this point. As I mentioned to you, the merchandise trade deficit last year America ran is $175 billion. That means we bought more, $175 billion more in products than we sold abroad. This is a metastasizing cancer in the belly of America that is eating out our substance. We don't make shoes anymore. We only make 1/3 of our textiles. We don't make radios, TVs, 2/3 of our cars. We're losing basic industries, my friends. I believe in free and fair trade with free and fair traders like Germany, England, Europe, but I do not believe in being a wimp when you got a country like China that puts a 40% tariff on American goods. You have got to be tough if you're going to break open foreign markets to American goods and get rid of these monstrous trade deficits.
Thank you, sir. We're next going to take a question from another member of the media here in South Carolina. Skylar Croft is with the Charleston Post and Courier newspaper. Scott?
Mr. Buchanan has written extensively in support of the Confederate flag above the State House here. Our Attorney General Charlie Condon has said that he would only support Mr. Dole as long as he supports the flag also. Is it your vision of the Republican Party to support this stance that many minorities say is divisive and exclusionary?
Mr. Forbes, you have 45 seconds.
I believe that should be a state decision, but I do believe you raise a very basic question about the unity of America. What makes America unique is what keeps us together. We are not kept together by the traditional glues of military force, a common ancestry, a common religion, a common race. What keeps us together in America is a shared set of ideas and ideals, a belief in freedom, a belief in democracy, a belief in the equality of the individual before the law, a belief in the dignity of the individual, a belief in progress, a belief that all of us should have a chance to get ahead. And I think the real issue is, how do we make the word opportunity a word of reality for all Americans and not a word of rhetoric? And part of my campaign is geared to that, making opportunity a reality in our inner cities through things like enterprise zones.
Thank you, sir. Senator Dole.
It's all right here in the 10th Amendment. Returning power to the states and power to the people. This ought to be a state decision. The federal government should not be involved. If you haven't read the 10th Amendment, ladies, it's only 28 words in length, and it simply says, unless the power is given to the federal government or denied to states, it belongs to the states and to the people respectively. This is a state matter. We ought to have opportunity. We ought to reach out to more and more people. You know, our opposition here is not all of these people. It's Bill Clinton. We've got to remind ourselves here today that we want to veto Bill Clinton in November 1996. That's what this is all about. And we need to pick the strongest possible candidate to do that. Somebody who can bring America together. Somebody who can bring our party together. Someone with experience, someone with judgment, somebody who's prepared to do the job. And I hope you'll look at our campaign very carefully.
Mr. Buchanan.
Well, I got sort of a personal interest in this. My great-grandfather was captured in the Battle of Atlanta fighting against General Sherman's army just before he was burned the city. And he moved up here, and then he burned Columbia. That Confederate battle flag is to me, a symbol of defiance, courage, bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. And I believe that everyone should stand up for their heritage. It didn't fly over slave quarters. It flew over battlefields like Chickamauga and Cold Harbor, Antietam and Gettysburg. If we're going to take down the flag, why don't we take down the statues of General Lee and all the Confederates on the southern side of that field at Gettysburg? This is an outrage. We got to stand up for our heritage. My friends, there is room in America for the fighting song of the civil rights movement, We Shall Overcome. And there's got to be room for Dixie as well.
Governor Alexander.
Well, I believe that's an entirely a matter for South Carolina to decide, but let me say something about why I believe that. Sometimes my friends say to me that I believe that too much should go back to the states. I remember when I became governor, the first thing I did was close our Washington office. I asked President Reagan to end Washington's involvement in elementary and secondary education because I wanted to put the responsibility where it ought to be. I believe decisions about abortion, about whether kids bring knives into school, ought not to be matters of federal law. They ought to be the province of strong families, strong neighborhoods, strong churches, strong synagogues, and strong schools. I believe we need to ask less of Washington and more of ourselves. So even when one state or one community does something that other states don't understand as clearly, I think that's their province to do that in this country. We work state by state, community by community, family by family. We can discuss these things there and come to a much stronger America in that way.
Thank you, Governor. And stay tuned. We'll have more of our debate with the Republican candidates for president in just a moment. And then we'll be back for the last segment, about 20 minutes.
Ask them if they can put in a question.
Do you have another media question?
We do have one more media question.
I'm not like straw poll Phil.
Okay.
Sit it down.
Okay.
All we need now is Bob Jones.
I'm sure it's coming.
Okay.
Will you be here all week, or you say you're going to New England maybe
I'm
one
going to
day?
go through here. What I generally do is go like I did in Arizona, go all the way through the day of the primary. I do as much morning radio shows as I can. About 30 of them. Fly out and land and doing something else.
That's pretty good.
And I'm going to try to do, as I said, I'm going to try to do Maryland, Massachusetts, and Maine, maybe New York. We might get on 25 ballots. Well, I got that going at 18. And then I got to get down to Atlanta for 8th West. And I'm going to do coming up into Tennessee, Lamont.
Oh, no.
Coming to Tennessee.
Where are you going?
We're going to go, I'm going to take a bus tour. I'm going to get and try to go across. I'm down from Georgia 2 days, and I'm going to go to Florida. I might fly down to Miami. I'm going to go across Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, my ancestors' home, across the top of Louisiana, Texas, and up into Oklahoma.
All on the bus?
All on the bus.
That's a good
Very
idea.
populous, you know. I think it looks populous.
Looks that way. It's probably more efficient than
I think it is. And,
Plane,
you know,
plane.
plane's very.
Welcome back to our debate. We're going to take a question now from Gary Carr. He's with the Associated Press here in South Carolina. Gary?
One of your former rivals said he would not run for re-election if he failed to balance the budget within 4 years. Is there anything so compelling for the rest of you that you would guarantee right now, if you failed to do it, you would not run for re-election?
Senator Dole, 45 seconds.
In 4 years or 7 years? But
4 years.
well, we've already agreed on a 7-year plan, and that's what we met with Speaker Gingrich yesterday morning to lay it out. We've got an agenda for a balanced budget. We'll bring interest rates down 2% as soon as we get a president who will sign it. That means lower interest rates for a student loan, for a home loan, for a car loan. It means creating more jobs and opportunities. What we need to do, it's not the magic in the years, the magic getting it done in 7 years. President Clinton was all over the lot. First he was for 5, and then 6, and then 8, and then 9, and then 10, and then he finally agreed to 7. We need to get this job done. We need to have a balanced budget in the Constitution, too. We need to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We're only 1 vote short in the United States Senate. Well,
Time up, Senator. Thank you, sir. Mr. Buchanan.
Let me say this. I have not given any consideration to something like that I'd immediately leave, but I'll tell you this. I'm going to run as president, act as president, in a way that's going to be utterly indifferent to political considerations. I know my position on pro-life is controversial. I know my stand against affirmative action. Doing away with quotas in the first week is controversial. We're going to do it one after another after another. I'm going to run the presidency the way I've run my campaign and the way I've run my life. I've been a consistent, outspoken, fighting, conservative traditionalist. I've stood up against Ronald Reagan when he raised taxes, who I love very much. I stood up against George Bush, who does not love me very much, when he raised taxes. And that's the way we're going to conduct the presidency. We're going to have the greatest conservative administration you've ever seen.
Time
For
up,
8
Mr.
months, the
Buchanan.
Washington Post is going to be...
Time up, sir. Thank you. Governor Alexander.
That's not the way I look at executive leadership. I do it the other way. I remember when I was governor, the teachers union defeated me as I was trying to enact the only state program to pay more for teaching well. I considered resigning and running for re-election with that as the issue to marshal public support for it. So if I tried to balance the budget and the Congress rejected it, I'd make it the issue in the re-election for second term. See, I think the president's job is to set a limited agenda, develop a strategy, and persuade half the people he's right. So if you say at the front end, I'm going to quit if what I promised to do doesn't happen, I think that's just the reverse of the way a president ought to act.
Mr. Forbes.
The chief goal of a president is to make it possible for the American economy and the American people to have a chance to get ahead. Growth is the objective. Opportunity is the objective. The balanced budget is simply a means to an end. There's a right way to do it, and there's a wrong way to do it. To get America moving, we need a flat tax that is a tax cut. It'll remove the principal source of corruption in Washington and give every family a tax break and help create investment in America. We need lower interest rates by making the dollar sound. We need a better education system by returning control to the parents. We need medical savings accounts, return more power to the elderly, and we need a new Social Security system for younger Americans. If we make those changes to get America moving, we'll have the strength to balance the budget through growth as well as spending cuts. But concentrating on the balanced budget alone is a recipe for disaster. We've got to do everything. Get America growing again.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to take another look at another ad that's been run in this campaign. You will not see the actual ad itself, but this is a transcript, and we'll have the words that the ad used, and you'll hear those words. This is from the Forbes campaign. Lamar Alexander brags he balanced budgets as governor, but he doesn't tell you he raised taxes 4 times to do it while doubling state spending. Running for president, Lamar Alexander collects $295,000 a year from his law firm that lobbies for special interest in Washington. And Governor Alexander, is that ad accurate?
Well, I think Steve was right to stop running ads like that. I've never lobbied. I do work for a law firm. I actually have a job outside government. I've resigned that job now that I'm running for president. As far as taxes, after 8 years, Steve could have pointed out, if he'd been generous, that I balanced 8 budgets, reduced the state debt, had a AAA bond rating, no personal income tax, and the 5th lowest taxes. 3 of the 4 tax increases he talks about were fee increases to build the best road system in the country. Ronald Reagan did that. We all want better roads. The other one was, I'd do it again. I told the teachers and the people of Tennessee that we would, if we would become the first state to pay teachers more for teaching well, merit pay, that I would pay for it, and we did that. And it's helped us grow jobs and have a much stronger state economy.
Thank you. Mr. Forbes, do you stand by your ad?
I absolutely stand by it. As governor, he did raise taxes. As governor, he did double state spending. And when he became education secretary, he increased the size of that department too, increased the spending there. So he talks like a conservative, but he seems to act like a liberal. He also did work for a lobbying firm that paid him $295,000 a year. All that is true. Moreover,
Steve, you haven't learned a single thing in your whole campaign. The negative ads come right out of your mouth. You know that's not true.
It is
true. You've spent most of this year changing our Republican Party into a negative ad sideshow, starting with Bob Dole next to me, and you should be ashamed of yourself for continuing that kind of attack. You're absolutely wrong.
Lamar, as governor, but that was a charitable ad. That ad did not talk about some of those cozy business deals you did as governor, investing $1, getting $620,000 in return.
Time up, sir. Thank you very much.
You should go practice your dirty business on a race for the school board before you try for the presidency of the United States of America.
Cozy business deals are not capitalistic. They're reminders
My
of
ethics have never been questioned. You wait just a minute. My ethics have never been questioned. Never been questioned.
Mr. Buchanan.
The United States Senate, a Democratic majority, with Senator Dole there, examined everything I've done in my life, and not one single senator voted against that. You come into this campaign never having run for any office.
Thank you, Governor.
Smearing Bob Dole, smearing me.
Let's give the other candidates a chance to talk here, sir. Thank you.
You answered the question how you turned $1 into $620,000.
Hold it.
Time out.
It's my turn, I think. Bob, can you get them to yield to me, Bob?
I like what they're doing, but I don't know.
I'm enjoying this. We'll yield you guys some more time. No, let me say this. Look, let me side with Lamar on this, really. And let me side with Steve Forbes on the issue of, I don't care how much Steve Forbes made. Steve Forbes inherited 400, whatever it was.
84.
He inherited the money. So what? Who cares what's in his tax return? Who cares about this nonsense? Why don't we focus this on the issues? Focus on what we're going to do for the country. And when we criticize an opponent, let's do it. If they stood with NAFTA and GATT And I don't believe in those. I stood against them. Let's argue it on that basis and get away from this personal nonsense that they're doing to Steve, and Steve, I think you're doing to Lamar.
Senator Dole, your opportunity.
Well, I'm running for president. I don't know what these other guys are running for. You know, I want to be president of the United States. I don't want an ad agency. Never wanted an ad agency. I don't run a magazine. But I do know how to make Congress work, and I know how to reach out to people. I know what the country needs. It needs strong leadership. We need to defeat Bill Clinton. That's what we're here about. And there'll be a negative ad or two about Bill Clinton in the fall. These will be accurate ads, but they probably some will say they're negative. So what we ought to get on with is business of America. The greatest country on the face of the earth. We're proud to live in it. I'm proud to live in it. Proud to serve in uniform. Proud to help defend my country. And I want to make it better for your kids and your grandkids, and for everybody who lives in America. They can run all these ads they want. We've got nothing but positive ads on now.
Thank you, Senator Dole. Gentlemen, we're going to take another question from a member of our audience, probably the youngest member of our audience. His name is Jim Wellborn. He is a second grader from Greenwood County, and he is going to repeat your answers back to his class, and you'll have 30 seconds each to answer his question. Jim?
My question is, how do you plan to stop drugs and violence?
The question is, how do you plan to stop drugs and violence? Mr. Buchanan.
Well, I think what we've got to do, it's a two-part system, young man. First thing you got to do is you really got to make an all-out effort at the frontier and the border to stop the drugs from coming into the country of the United States, and we're going to do that. And we're going to build a security fence along the Mexican border whence most of those drugs now come. But secondly, young fellow, we're going to have to educate you and your generation to the fact that these are stupid, wicked, evil things. They destroy the hearts and souls of youngsters. And in place of that, I think we got to get back into our schools some ideas of right and wrong that have been driven out when the Bible, the Ten Commandments, and all that was driven out of your public school. Two parts: stop the drugs from coming in, teach youngsters how wrong and bad they can be, and how bad they are for you. And I think for that two-part battle, we just keep at it, and we can win this war.
Thank you. Governor Alexander.
Tell me your name again, because I missed it.
Jim.
Tim?
Jim Wellborn.
Jim, Pat's right on the first thing. I'd ask the military to take the lead in securing our borders from illegal drugs and to help coordinate our efforts on illegal immigration. But the real responsibility in the end is with your family, your neighborhood, your church, your school, and with you, because in the end, only you can make the decision. So that's where the responsibility lies, and I think we need a president who expects less of Washington and more of ourselves, and that starts with young people like you.
Mr. Forbes, 30 seconds.
There is, Jim, a lot more that can be done to stop the drugs from coming into America. We know they start from Colombia. We know they go through Mexico. We should beef up the Border Patrol. We should use, where appropriate, military force against drug lords and their laboratories overseas. But also, too, we must start with the president saying what we used to say in the 1980s, just say no. Since then, between the mid-1980s and 1993, drug use fell in America. But in the last 3 years, it has gone up alarmingly, especially among younger people in America. And so I think we should have a program starting from the top which says, just say no, don't do it. It's a dumb, destructive thing to do.
Time up, sir.
It must come from within us.
Thank you. Senator Dole.
Well, for 13 years, partly thanks to Nancy Reagan, we had a decrease in the use of marijuana. But since 1992, marijuana use has doubled, and primarily for children. 6 out of 10 arrestees are arrested for illegal drug use. It shows we've got a real problem in America. We need to protect our border. We don't need to create a new Army unit. We've got 5,000 Border Patrol people there now. Let's beef up the Border Patrol. Let's start teaching education. And let's make it very difficult for those who sell these drugs to our children, illegal drugs. Let's give them all we can as far as punishment is concerned. The bottom line is you need strong moral leadership in the White House. Somebody in the bully pulpit speaking about family values and Hollywood and television, all the violence we have and all the drugs we have. And Bob Dole will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And gentlemen, time flies when you're having fun, and it's time for closing statements. And Governor Alexander, you get 1 minute for your closing statement.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to all of you for listening. Looking over the group, these are some good colleagues. Steve has done a good job with Forbes. Senator Dole is our finest legislative leader, I think. Pat can take on anybody on Crossfire, but what we're looking for is a president. We started in 1994 with a country worried about job growth, about the arrogance of Washington, and about the breakdown of the family. And we don't need more magazine salesmen in Washington. We don't even need to move our most distinguished senator down the street. We don't need another television commentator. I believe we need someone who can first beat Bill Clinton and then give presidential leadership to the Republican agenda. Go across this country and take that contract and interpret and explain to people why it's right. I believe a Republican governor from the New South, who's been a university president, who's had a lifetime of work in the real world, who knows Washington as well, would be the right person to be the first president of the next century, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Forbes, you have a minute for your closing statement.
The whole basis of my campaign can be summed up in the words, more freedom, less government. All the proposals I've made in this campaign all have the common thread and theme of returning opportunity, power, responsibility, control to the American people, to the American family, to America's communities. That has been our strength before. It can be our strength again. My proposals include a flat tax that is a tax cut. You can spend your money better than the IRS. They also include parental control of education. You'll do education better than the bureaucrats will. They also include a new Social Security system for younger Americans, medical savings accounts for the elderly. I've put more specific proposals on the table on how to get America moving, returning control to America, than my opponents. It is going to take an outsider to do it. If the lifetime politicians had the answers, they would have implemented them by now. Together, we can rebuild America's moral foundations. Together, we can revive the American economy.
Thank you.
And together, we can restore the American dream. Thank you very much.
Senator Dole.
Well, for 25 years, we've seen the Republican Party grow in South Carolina. Governor Campbell, Governor Beasley have done a great job. And now we're just one election away from having a president to make all this work. And I want to ask you all for your support, those who may be viewing or listening on radio, those in the audience. We're looking for a president of the United States. We're looking for someone who's been tested. Somebody knows what made America great in the first place. Somebody who's made a little sacrifice. Somebody who grew up in a basement with 5 other people, know a little about hard times. Somebody whose father wore his overalls to work every day for 42 years and is proud of it. The point is somebody who knows about America. I want America to be the greatest country on the face of the earth. We are now, but we can be better as we go into the next century. This is not a game. This is about defeating Bill Clinton in November 1996. And there's one candidate who can defeat Bill Clinton in 1996, and that's Bob Dole. And again, I ask for your support, and I thank WIS for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan.
My friend Lamar disparaged television commentators, but I would say, Lamar, that the last television commentator we had in the White House, Ronald Reagan, did a pretty good job. Because Ronald Reagan had moral courage. And that's what you need in the White House, my friends. I've been there for 8 years. And I stood with South Carolina on the battle over the Citadel. I stood with South Carolina in the battle over the Confederate battle flag. I stood with South Carolina when the Christian bashers came in, stripped Bob Jones University of its tax exemption. And I think that was an act of bigotry when they did that. We've stood with South Carolina. I want them to stand with me. Stand with me for a new conservatism of the heart that looks out for those Americans who have no voice and those Americans losing their jobs when these factories move overseas. I refer to minority Americans. I refer to women making less than $30,000 a year who vote for me in greater numbers. We're a strong party. We've got principles. We've got a lot of support up on Wall Street, a lot of rich folks. We've got to stand for the folks left out. That is the calling of a president, to speak for those who have no voice in America, and that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, sir, and we appreciate the candidates being with us today. We appreciate you watching. And on behalf of the South Carolina Business and Industry Political Education Committee, CNN, and WIS Television, I'm David Stanton. Good day.
After today's debate, the candidates met with the media. The South Carolina primary is Saturday. 37 delegates are at stake. We'll hear from Pat Buchanan, Steve Forbes, Senator Bob Dole, and Lamar Alexander.
Out there in the country saw it. They are going to see it this afternoon. I thought it was one of the best debates so far, and I thought we did as well as we've ever done.